Attorney's Office, as well as the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Drug Enforcement Administration, the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, the Postal Inspection Service, and the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. As a result of that 8-month investigation, on January 31st, 2019, grand jury returned a true bill indictment charging 23 individuals. Those individuals were identified as members of a drug trafficking organization operating here on the southwest side of Indianapolis in the Hawville neighborhood. They were charged and have been charged with conspiracy to distribute heroin, methamphetamine, cocaine, and some firearms-related charges. The investigative response taken by this group was in response to increased levels of gun violence, which we saw in early 2018 in this area, and that resulted in the 8-month investigation. As of this date, 20 of the 23 named individuals are in federal custody. Yesterday, on February 13th, 2019, 23 arrest warrants and 30 search warrants were served in this area. Approximately 400 state, local, and federal law enforcement agents served those warrants. All of those warrants, the arrest warrants and the search warrants, were safely executed in a way in strict compliance with the Constitution of this state and of this country by professional law enforcement officers. No law enforcement officers were injured. No civilians were injured. No defendants were injured, and the warrants were served without a single shot being fired. As a result of these warrants, law enforcement made significant seizures. 40 firearms were seized, including 3 assault rifles. 4 of the firearms were stolen. So 40 guns that were on the street early in the morning of February 13th, 2019 are now in police property rooms. In addition to the methamphetamine amounts that were listed in the indictment that you were provided, 450 grams of methamphetamine was seized during the search warrants yesterday. 113 grams of heroin was seized as a result of these warrants. 30 grams of fentanyl was seized, and if you don't know what fentanyl is, it's a synthetic opioid. 1 gram of fentanyl is a lethal amount and causes overdose. 100 pills, hundreds of pills rather, of illegally possessed prescription drugs, to include opioids, were seized. In excess of $155,000 in currency, cash, drug proceeds were seized as a result of these warrants. 1 additional subject, Sheridan Sisk, was arrested and charged federally. That brings the number of federally charged individuals out of this organization to 24 that were federally charged. The penalties they face are mandatory minimum sentence of 10 years in federal prison up to a maximum sentence of 25 years. Also charged were approximately 10 individuals who were charged in violation of state laws by the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. You have been provided copies of the grand jury indictment in this matter. Today, the city of Indianapolis is a safer city than it was 2 days ago. An armed drug trafficking organization with the goal of infesting a neighborhood with methamphetamine, heroin, cocaine, fentanyl, and pills while armed with dangerous weapons, have been removed from a neighborhood in Indianapolis. Because of the tireless work. Yeah. Well, thank you. Because of the tireless work of the individuals standing behind me, Hallville neighborhood is now a safer place to live, a safer place to work, and a safer place to raise a family. 40 guns were taken off the street. 40 guns that we can guarantee all of you will not be used in shootings. Gram quantities, 430 grams of methamphetamine, will not be sold and will not ruin the lives of hundreds of families. Large quantities of heroin and fentanyl will not be distributed in our community, resulting in drug overdoses and deaths. And more than $155,000 in cash, money used to fuel the drugs coming into this community, will not be spent and will not be in the pockets of drug traffickers. In a bit of irony, that drug money will be federally forfeited, and it will be equitably shared with law enforcement agencies. This drug trafficking organization will actually pay for the investigation that resulted in their arrest. Before we hear from some other speakers, I want to highlight a few things that are important to me and hopefully are important to you. First, this is another chapter in the Department of Justice strategy to reduce gun violence in Indianapolis. For this Department of Justice administration, the reduction of gun violence is the #1 priority. And they have made reduction of gun violence in many of our urban cities, to include Indianapolis, a priority. That has resulted in more federal charges for illegally possessing firearms in this community. Over 200 individuals have been charged with illegally possessing firearms last year. That's resulted in their detention, their conviction, and their sentence to prison. More cases are being targeted. Armed drug trafficking organizations are being targeted. In this particular case, federal law enforcement and everybody behind me threw the kitchen sink at this organization. No expense was spared. No technique was not used. Everything that was a law enforcement technique that we could constitutionally use to dismantle this organization, we used. We spared no expense to take down this organization. I would point out this is the second such case that the Department of Justice has done in the last 30 days. Back in January 18th of 2019, a group, this same group, this time led by the Drug Enforcement Administration, arrested 22 individuals in a neighborhood in Indianapolis. That group resulted in 22 federal indictments. 20 firearms were taken off the streets in January of 2019. Kilogram quantities of heroin were taken off the streets in January of 2019. So the enforcement priority of targeting these heavily armed drug trafficking organizations as part of the Department of Justice strategy to reduce gun violence in this community will continue. The other thing I want to highlight is we will continue to obtain funding for this city to use the latest and most progressive techniques to collect data. Later, hopefully, we will talk about the Gun Crime Intelligence Center, which was an $800,000 grant for the police department and a $200,000 grant for the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. That Gun Crime Intelligence Center, which is sponsored in part by the Department of Justice and Project Safe Neighborhoods, will allow us to target trigger pullers, people that are shooting, so we can get the shooters off the streets. And that will reduce gun violence here with the latest in technology. We will also continue to fund community prevention efforts. That is a big part of what the Department of Justice will do. And I'm talking about grants like the $1 million grant that was given to the John Bonner Center and the East Side Promise Zone as part of Project Safe Neighborhoods. That prevention-based technique will continue to be used and will continue to be a part of the Department of Justice strategy to reduce gun violence. The second point I want to make is that these cases make a difference. These types of cases make a difference when you're talking about gun violence. Drug trafficking, particularly armed drug trafficking, is not like other businesses. If you are dealing drugs, if you are trafficking in drugs, and your customers do not pay you, you cannot go to court and ask for a breach of contract suit. You can't get your money back that way through a legal way. The only way that you can get your money back, or the only way you can enforce getting paid, is either through violence or a credible threat of violence. So by getting drug traffickers, and specifically armed drug traffickers, off the street, it will make a difference and will reduce gun violence here in Indianapolis. The third point I want to make is, as I said, this is a violent business. Drug trafficking is a violent business. So we took $155,000 off the street just to show what type of business it is. And I think we should make it clear, because a lot of people think, well, it's just money, it's okay. It's not okay. If you're making money as an armed drug dealer, selling drugs in our community, we need to call that money what it is. It's blood money, and that's what it is. And my fourth and final part, and this I think is something we almost take for granted. In this district and in this city, we are blessed. We are blessed with professional law enforcement officers who respect and follow our Constitution, and they protect and serve the public. These operations, like the operations that went forward yesterday, are major operations. 400 law enforcement agents, officers, in a very small neighborhood. They're in a neighborhood at a time and in a place where gun violence is a concern to all of us. And those 400 law enforcement professionals served 30 search warrants, 24 arrest warrants. They arrested individuals who were heavily armed, but no shots were fired, not one. Nobody was hurt, no civilians, no defendants were hurt, no law enforcement was hurt. This happens time and time in this community, and it should be noticed and appreciated. So thank you all for coming. We have the mayor of our city who is here with us, who has been a long-time partner of federal law enforcement and was the former United States attorney, and I appreciate his support in these cases, which are difficult and time-consuming and do require some patience from the mayor to put these cases together to fruition so that we get the right result. Mr. Mayor.
Good job, Josh. Excellent. Now are you all starting to understand why I enjoyed being the United States Attorney? Mr. United States Attorney, what you have reported to the public today, I think they appreciate the magnitude, the size, and the scope, and with all of the federal law enforcement partners present today, state and local law enforcement officials, what was accomplished over these last few weeks, and particularly yesterday, is what is known as a flawless law enforcement effort. And I couldn't be more proud of the United States Attorney's Office, but of every agent, every officer, every law enforcement official who is able to ensure the success of this type of operation without a shot being fired, without a person being injured, and without any loss of life. It is a flawless effort, and I want you to join me in congratulating everyone up here once again for their great work. Let me reemphasize one thing the United States Attorney said, which I think bears all of us spreading the word. Because of the efforts being made by federal, state, and local law enforcement officials, and particularly as a result of the announcement today, our city, this neighborhood, is safer today than it was yesterday. And that's our goal each and every day, that sometimes by leaps, sometimes by steps, all of these professionals are dedicated to making sure that our streets are safer and our neighborhoods are more peaceful. And I could not be prouder of them. These individuals who removed from our community literally account for thousands of crimes. When I was the United States Attorney, Josh, you and I will remember it was reasonably understood. If you were able to solve one bank robbery, you probably were solving 6 bank robberies. Are you following me? And that's what that's the logical extension. That's the ripple effect of what happened yesterday. These arrests will not only substantially reduce the number of illicit drugs in our city, but they also dramatically curtail the violent crime that accompanies these drugs. And at risk, I'd even offer the street value of the drugs taken off the streets, but that might get me in trouble with the federal judiciary.
Never been a concern before.
You know, while these arrests conclude one part of crime fighting, here I am as mayor to say, now the next chapter begins. Healing a community. Make no mistake, ending a criminal enterprise of this size leaves a vacuum in its wake. Now, that vacuum must be filled, not by more drug dealers, not by some new drug trafficking organization. It needs to be part of our neighborhood strategy as a city to make sure that that vacuum is filled by the hope of the neighbors and the neighborhoods positively impacted. With jobs, with educational opportunity, with health, with hope, with community resources and supportive services for the families and the residents that have been affected by this level of mischief and mayhem. So our Office of Public Health and Safety in the City of Indianapolis will be bringing into the community city resources to help fill the needs of neighborhoods that are in recovery today, that are rid of the menace, the mindless menace of violence. Because, and I don't think there'd be a single soul standing before you today who would disagree with what I'm about ready to say. We must do more than punish crime. Crime's devastation must be repaired, and crime's return must be prevented. And that's where you come in. That's our job. That's your job. That's the community's job. We begin that effort today for Hawville, We begin that effort today for this part of Indianapolis, and it is in that spirit I am proud to introduce the Chief of the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, Chief Brian Roach. Chief.
So this is a great day, obviously. There's a lot of work that has been done, and it's been going on for 8 months. But for me, this is Southwest District. This is where I was a commander. For me, this is about Hallville. If you remember in the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s, Hallville was on the map nationwide for the Weed and Seed program. Everybody was coming to Indianapolis and looking at Hallville on how you did that and the cooperation that you had with both the community and the police department. That was probably 20 years ago, and here we are again. And both those investigations that U.S. Attorney Minkler talked about occurred in this area. I hope that you got the subtleties, not so subtle with the mayor. I think he really came out and said this is about rebuilding and it's about community and it's not just about punishment. But let me tell you how we got here. I talk all the time about every 2 weeks, a lot of the people and men and women in this room get together from all different agencies, and they talk about specific people, specific behaviors, and specific places that are driving the violence, and that's all they discuss. This is a result of everybody coming together. The Indianapolis Police Department, as large as we are, we could not have done this. We did not have the resources to do it. We didn't have the intelligence, quite frankly, to do it. We didn't have all the connections that all the other agencies together allow from that. The group of people that we're talking about, there were many arrests through the state prosecutor and Prosecutor Curry in his office, and we thank him. But during that 8-month investigation, there were many arrests prior to that, and state arrests. And based on that, there were even more guns taken and more people put in jail. But if you look at all those associated with this group, it's about 130 people. They are responsible for 2,500 violent crimes throughout their years. So think of that, 130 people, 2,500, not all crimes, violent crimes. So don't think this is about drugs. Drugs is that behavior. That was the tool that we used in order to get to those people that are perpetuating the violence. Now the place is another part of that. So I think now it's time, how do we come back in, like the Weed and Seed model, and how do you help the place? What is it about Hallville that is drawing this? And how do we fix that? And how do we help the people? So you didn't hear it talked about, but all of these investigators that interviewed these people during the process, at the same time were trying to glean information about the hole that we were connecting and pulling people out of families, right? And the other issues that we might be creating by someone going to jail. The Office of Public Health and Safety was there. There was also a resource list for those people who needed resources because there are some underlying issues of why people are involved in crimes. That was given to them. A quick story, one of the investigators was talking to someone who got caught up in this, and they were concerned about losing their home. They had a storage unit that a lot of confiscated items were being housed in, and that's how they got caught up in it. The Office of Public Health, and she was going to get evicted. Office of Public Health and Safety went yesterday to the management and talked to the process, and that lady now has a place to stay. So for the next couple weeks, and hopefully it'll involve our CRDCs and the community of Hallville and Hallville Strong and the Southwest District will be getting together. They've already started. They're canvassing the area. They're trying to identify what are those needs in Hallville so we don't have this kind of law enforcement effort ever again in Hallville. So I hope you caught that subtlety that it's about the place, and that's why law enforcement is here. So I hope you see the men and women that have spent 8 months doing this and continue to do this. I hope you start seeing them as guardians of you and your neighborhood. The last thing I'll say, and Grant Mendenhall, the FBI SAC, is here and will speak after me. But he and I were texting yesterday, and I was telling him I appreciated all his efforts, and he was saying he appreciated my efforts. And we were kind of congratulating on how well the men and women, most of them in here and behind me, had done on this project. And the last thing he sent me was one team. And it really is true, and it's not everywhere in the nation. But this city has one team law enforcement-wise, and I think we proved that today, and we will continue to prove that. But we also have to become one team as law enforcement in the community in order to combat this. So looking forward to that. The last thing I'll say, I just gave you a number of 130 people, so there are people that we missed. So if they hear this, they have two options. They can continue down the path, and we'll be back, or they can reach out to the Office of Public Health and Safety or somebody through services and get their lives straightened. Appreciate all the work that the men and women did, and they continue to do. So this isn't the only violent group in Indianapolis, and we already have the name of the group that we're going after next. So if you're involved in violence in Indianapolis, you've got a couple choices. Continue along that path, and we're coming, or stop and get some help and identify some of those issues that you may have that will get you out of that game. So thank you, and I'll give you Grant Mendenhall, the special agent in charge with the FBI.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. Members of the public, it's great to see you out here today. Members of the media, thanks for being here to cover the results of this important investigation that's already been detailed here today. I can sum up really in one word the success of yesterday's operation, and I'm going to sound like a broken record with all my partners up here, but that word is partnerships. Yesterday was the culmination of a many months long investigation centered here in the Hallville neighborhood of organized drug trafficking and the associated violent crime that surrounds that drug trafficking. And this was an FBI-led investigation, led by our Safe Streets Task Force. But while this investigation was FBI-led, the success of the investigation and the results you saw yesterday were wholly dependent on the partnerships that are represented by the law enforcement officers that are standing here with me and the ones here in the crowd. So make no mistake, the partnership piece of this is how we win. And what you've heard today really gets at a phrase that you may not be familiar with, but we call it the whole of government approach, and that's truly what this is. Law enforcement's not 100% of the answer to these hard problems that are presented in some of our neighborhoods. The objective of this investigation, again, was to target a violent drug trafficking organization and all of that violent crime that surrounds that organization. Interesting thing about that is that's not only an FBI priority, that's a priority and a mission set that the FBI shares with every law enforcement partner here. And the commitment, as you heard the chief and the mayor and Mr. Minkler say, the commitment to that mission and the commitment to making our neighborhoods safer, that's not just an FBI commitment, that's a whole of government and a whole of law enforcement commitment to the people of the city of Indianapolis. Yesterday, again, I'm a broken record, but the partnership piece, yesterday that was on full display. Mr. Minkler mentioned over 400 law enforcement officers participated in this successful operation, and those officers came from here in the Indianapolis area and the surrounding communities, from as far west as Terre Haute, and FBI agents from here in Indianapolis, from Detroit, Michigan, from Louisville, Kentucky, and from Cincinnati, Ohio. So this was a major undertaking supported by really the law enforcement community really in the region, not just in the state of Indiana. So I thought that was important to mention. I think the other thing that was on display yesterday was, and Brian mentioned this, the effectiveness of the law enforcement partnerships here in the state of Indiana. Among the most effective partnerships across the entire United States. And I think that was not only on display yesterday during the operation, but it was on display for the last 7 or 8 months during the conduct of the investigation. To the public, a quick message. What you saw yesterday as a culmination of a lengthy investigation, when there's a hard problem, in one of our neighborhoods that involves drug trafficking and violent crime, what you saw yesterday is what you're going to see every time. That's what we do. That's what this partnership is all about. And to echo Brian's comments, the message to potential offenders out there is equally clear. The result that you saw yesterday is the result you're going to get every time if you choose to be involved in drug trafficking and the associated violent crime. So again, I thank everybody for being here. Really appreciate it, and I appreciate the partnerships that are represented here today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions? Certainly. So in response to increased gun violence, we threw about every law enforcement technique that there is. That some of them, of course, are trade secrets that we don't want to talk about. Many of them that we use include surveillance, search warrants, controlled buys of narcotics, wiretaps of phones, all the typical things that we use to dismantle a cartel-level organization. One thing that's probably gotten a lot of coverage lately is the prosecution of Chapo Guzman, right? That, you read all about that. And clearly no expense was spared to investigate that individual, arrest him, and prosecute him. Now, I'm not obviously saying that this is like prosecuting Chapo Guzman, but for Indianapolis, when we approach a challenge like this, we approach it in much the same way. That is, nothing is off the table for this organization involved in violent drug trafficking, and we use absolutely every prosecutive technique, every investigative technique that's allowed under the Constitution to dismantle this organization. Does that answer your question? Okay. Garage band, I'm not sure about that one, yeah. Yeah. Sure, yeah. So 4 of them were assault weapons. Several of them were high-capacity handguns. Several of them were shotguns. Several of them were stolen firearms. What's important is the guns themselves are dangerous. Obviously, any gun is a dangerous weapon, but the individuals in this case that possess them. The focus of federal prosecution is not necessarily on a firearm. It is on the individual that possesses the firearm. So a drug trafficker in possession of a firearm, we see as if that individual is prosecuted, that will reduce gun violence. A recidivist, somebody with a long line of criminal convictions, particularly violent criminal convictions, who's in possession of a firearm, we see that individual as somebody that should be targeted for prosecutions. An individual that is doing commercial robberies with a firearm, we see that individual as somebody that has been targeted for federal prosecutions. Certainly, we're not immunizing drug traffickers, but from our perspective, when we see who is the greater threat, a drug trafficker who's armed with a firearm is going to get more of our resources, more of our attention, more of our priority than somebody that is not armed with a firearm. Does that make sense to you? Thanks. The entire Project Safe Neighborhoods program started in 2017. This case started in April of 2018. So it was an 8-month investigation culminated by the grand jury indictments at the end of January, and then the takedown and the search and arrest warrants on the 13th. It was both. I would say the community was more helpful in terms of saying we need some attention here. Maybe the chief can speak to that.
Yeah, so I spoke to you about IVRP, and it really is the intelligence that's coming from the street up, but it's also our partners that knows maybe what's coming out, and having everybody in the room talking about specific people and places. Everybody has a piece of that, and a lot of that intel is officers just talking to the community. I can tell you that having been the Southwest District Commander and knowing the Southwest District Commander also, and Hallville neighborhood and the task force and the people that are involved in Hallville, I can guarantee you that what's going on in Hallville and throughout Southwest District is always communicated. So just like any other district, we take that information. I don't know that you could give it a 50-50 or whatever, but I think the key is that we all came together and developed the intelligence that allowed smart, sharp police officers to figure it out and have this impact.
Certainly, to your point, I mean, it has to be frustrating if you're in the community and say, this is going on, and nothing's done about it. So hopefully this positively reinforces people in the community that don't want to put up with this and tell law enforcement about it, that we will respond to that challenge, and we will respond to that challenge with very consequential means. 400 police officers, law enforcement officers coming in and serving warrants. Yes, sir. Arrest warrants. Can you talk about what you did with the families that were some of the warrants, or Chief, one of you did?
So I'm glad you said that, because what's interesting is that information was collected. So as they did interviews, there was a form, how many children in the house, how many people live in the house. And that information was given to Shauna and OPHS. And then at the same time, they're out canvassing the neighborhood. The commander here on the district, as soon as we knew the second round of people had been collected and brought in, she was communicating to the Southwest District Council and also Hallville Strong to let them know what had occurred so that they can begin to rally. So no one was displaced that I know of. Everyone was given a resource list, and many of them they will touch bases with those families that are left now that they may have somebody that may be doing 25 years, and they're not going to come back until trial and it's adjudicated. So they will be, over the next 2 weeks, talking to them, rallying resources around it, and I think there's already a date set to be at Christamore House to try and bring all those resources in and try and help those families that are kind of left after the aftermath. Did you have one?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, one of the things I talked about is when we go after these cases, is trying to get the whole organization eliminated so it can't come back again, so it can't reconstitute. Sometimes that takes time. This investigation took 8 months, and I understand your frustration with that. You have to put up with the drug trafficking and the violence for that entire 8 months. But it's worth it. I will tell you that when we deal with this problem and we see it as a significant challenge, we want to make sure we deal with it in a consequential way. Not in a piecemeal way, not in a way that it's a slap on the hands. When we go after these drug trafficking organizations, we want to be certain that in strict compliance with our Constitution and all the laws of our state and our country, that these individuals are charged, that when they're charged, they're detained, that is, they're held without bond, that they're convicted and they're sent to prison. That is a strong message, and it sometimes takes a little bit more time than even I want it to take, but the message I would give them is the cavalry's coming. Hold on. We'll be there, and when we're there, the consequences will be substantial.
Just like to acknowledge a few other people that didn't get a chance to speak today, so if I forget somebody, please forgive me. IRS was a part of this, DEA, ATF, FBI, Postal Inspection, Prosecutor's Office, Sheriff's Office, Indiana State Police. I'd also like to thank Bob Osley for attending with us today, President of City County Council. To our community, thank you so much for being here. You could have picked a million places to be today on Valentine's Day, so thank you for being here. And to our officers here to my left, a lot of them were a part of the detail, although they work Southwest District. They played a very critical role, and you heard a little bit of that today. So we want to thank them, and obviously we want to thank Southwest Commander Susan Hill. Thank you.
Congratulations, sir. Job well done. Okay. I just deteriorated. So I was running in Zion. Let's talk about deterioration.